So welcome everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Geoff and I've been a Postmaster for about 9 years or so, and I'm a software developer. I've worked for SAP Canada, which is a software company, worldwide software company, with about 50,000 employees. I've worked there for 15 years as of this coming January. It's pretty unusual for someone to stay at the same company for so long, but I find it is a really great place to work, and I really enjoy the company culture and the people that I get to work with. So today's presentation, I'd like to share with you some tips on how to design and maintain a website. And I wonder, does anyone have any experience with this, say in a class at school where you've designed a website before? How many people have done this? So maybe about almost everyone. This is great. Cool. Some people have. I know this club, the Gavel Club, has a website, and I've seen it. It looks quite nice. So that's a great way to attract new members to the club, to do marketing, and also provide useful information. So essentially, today I'm going to talk about what is a website, how does it work in terms of the internet, like what happens when you type in an address into your browser, and I'll give some tips on how you can create a website without any knowledge of coding, and I'll give you some tips on what languages or technologies you should learn when you want to do some coding. So first of all, the internet is based on what's called clients and servers. When you have a cell phone or a computer at home, it's your client, it's something that you're using, and it's going to talk to a server somewhere out in the internet. A server is essentially another computer running somewhere in the world in a data center, and it is waiting for people to connect to it, and it will send back whatever it serves up. Kind of like a server at a restaurant brings you food, whereas a computer server is bringing you information or web pages. It can also give you music, games, or videos, like Netflix is based on that as well. But today I'll be focusing just on web pages. So let's say you wanted to create a web page yourself, and you don't have any money, and you don't know anything about coding. Well, this is a way you can do this by going to a free web hosting site such as WordPress.com. Lets you create a blog where you can post articles and news and anything you like. You can even design it using a different theme. And that is an easy way to get a website started. But if you're interested in, say, designing a website for a business or more professional looking one, there's a few technologies that are really helpful to understand if you want to make a website like that. The first one is HTML. I'll just write them up here so you can see the words. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Essentially, this is a special way to add tags into your document that tell the browser what everything is. So you might put an anchor tag with an A around a link, and the link will link to something else. Or you can put an image tag, and that will show an image on your web page. Another technology useful for web page design is CSS, and that stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So everything on an HTML document, you can apply styles to it. For example, if you wanted to make your title green and really big and maybe have a shadow on it or a box around it, you can use CSS to style the fonts, the borders, the spacing, add some margins around things, and that will be a set of properties that you can set. Like I can set my font to Arial and the size to 14 pixels and set it as red. So another technology, if you want to make your website interactive and you want to get into a bit of computer programming, a common way to make a web page interactive is by using JavaScript. So JavaScript is what actually I use every day as a computer programmer, because I mostly work on web pages and web-based applications. JavaScript, if you learn any programming language, JavaScript has a very similar syntax. Let's say you've learned Java or C++. You can also learn JavaScript, which looks pretty much the same. JavaScript and Java are actually totally different languages. One has the word script, one doesn't, but they're actually totally different. Okay, so let's say you learn some of these basic technologies. How do you actually create your own website? Well, you can actually pay a company to host your website for you, and some companies will charge you maybe $2 a month, $5 a month, and you can have a place where you can upload your HTML files, your CSS files, and your JavaScript files. I currently pay quite a bit more than that for my website because I have a dedicated server, and I pay about $500 for every 3 or 4 years. I renew it. But it lets me put as many websites as I want on there. I can host websites for my family and friends, and it doesn't cost me anything more to add more sites. I have a pretty big storage. I also do make some money from my websites. In university, I designed a website that you type in someone's name and it calculates their gender based on how masculine or feminine their name is online. And this was a very popular website that I currently make about $5 a day on ads from this website. So definitely that used a bit of more advanced backend programming, is something called PHP. PHP is what language that Mark Zuckerberg originally wrote Facebook in back when he created Facebook. And it's still a great language for writing the back-end side. That's where the data comes from for your application. For my website about names, the data gets stored in a database, and the data gets read and written into the database using PHP. So PHP is another programming language that looks also similar to JavaScript, but slightly different, and it works on the server itself. So there I talked a bit about 4 different technologies which are very useful for web page design. And a couple more things to note. If you are talented in drawing, visual design, you know how to take good photos, you can do illustrations, you have an idea about how to lay out a web page, that can be a really useful thing too, because it's fine that the web page has the right code, but if it doesn't look good or have a good usability, it's also not very effective. So if you have a web page that's really well designed, it's really important. It definitely takes a skill or to practice to learn how to do that, make a good visual design. One final thing is, how do people find your website? Well, usually people will find your website by going to Google and typing some keywords. If my website is about jazz piano, someone's going to search for certain names of songs or of artists that I might have written about on my blog. So to have the right keywords on your site will help people find it on Google. And something that the whole field of how do you make your website come up on Google better is called search engine optimization, SEO. I can write that one too. This is a whole other thing. It's like, how do you optimize your site so that it will be showing up in Google? When I first started making websites, it was really easy to get a good ranking. You could just use a bunch of tricks in your page and suddenly you'd be at number 1 on Google for something. Nowadays it's a lot harder. Google actually penalizes you if it thinks you're trying to game the system or try to artificially increase your page's ranking. But it's still a really important topic to learn about because you can do things like adding proper titles and headings to your web page, and make sure you do include the keywords so people can find it when they search for things on Google. That's all I wanted to talk about web page design. I do have a couple of minutes, I hope, for questions. So I'm hoping someone will have a question either about web pages or about computer programming. Please go ahead and ask a question. Yes, go ahead.
Is JavaScript really as hard as everyone says it is?
Is JavaScript really as hard as everyone says it is? I would say JavaScript is a very powerful language that you can pretty much do whatever you want in it. And some people have even recreated their favorite applications using JavaScript. There's a website called photop.com that is an entirely functional version of Photoshop just written in JavaScript. So you can pretty much write any application in JavaScript. And I would say to start with it, you want to start with some basic tutorials and maybe make some simple applications. Like don't start out trying to write Photoshop in JavaScript. Maybe write a little game that plays a guessing game about numbers with you or something, or maybe tic-tac-toe, or just make a text disappear and reappear when you click a button. There's a lot of simple things you can try doing initially, and then build up to more complicated applications. There are lots of resources on how to learn JavaScript programming online. You can go to various websites and you can take online courses or get lots of books from the library on JavaScript. I would say it is a pretty difficult language because there's so many different ways you can use JavaScript, and there's so many different libraries or modules different things you can use as you're programming. But I definitely think it's a good one to learn at least some basics of, because it's so popular in the industry, and people like me who do mostly front-end development are using JavaScript all the time. So definitely a good question, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Is JavaScript like the only language that can be incorporated directly into the website, or can like other languages like C++ or C or Java can do the same?
So the question was, thanks for the question, is JavaScript the only language you can use directly in your web page? So there are some variants of JavaScript. There's one called TypeScript, which essentially, it's slightly different syntax than JavaScript, but after you write the TypeScript, it runs it through a compiler and it just converts it to JavaScript. But TypeScript does have some advantages. It maybe finds more bugs as you're writing it. In terms of most languages, I think the browsers can only really understand JavaScript, but there are some languages that kind of convert over into it. There are some other ones regarding like, I can't remember what they're called, but they work better for animations or creating games that can do better simulations and graphics that will end up as JavaScript in the end. Great, good question, thank you. All right, yes, Josh.
What are some of the harmful practices people would use to artificially boost their SEO ranking?
So what would be some harmful practices that you can boost your SEO? Well, there are typically the main way that Google decides whether your website is better than somebody else or deserves a higher ranking is if there's lots of other web pages that link to your website. So if you had one website, my cooking website, might have 3,000 links from all the other cooking websites to mine because they all want to link to me, then my website's going to have a really good ranking. But what some people can do is they can artificially spam other sites with links to their site, like leave comments on other blogs and link to their site from there. And that can artificially increase their site's rankings. And that is seen as kind of like a spammy way to increase your ranking, especially if you're just leaving some spam comments on somebody else's site. Other ways that you could actually show a different page for the search engine as opposed to showing it for the humans. When you go to the web page, you wouldn't see all this extra text, but when the robot comes to your site, it would be full of all this other content. So kind of trying to hide things from the search engine or to show something different for the robot versus the human. Some things like that. Great. How am I doing for time?
13 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay, well, I'll finish up. Thank you so much, everyone. It was a really big pleasure to speak to you. And if you'd like to reach out, have any more questions, I think you can contact Linda, and she can provide my email at some point or forward questions over. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.